You are such a pain in the butt and a hassle, Ethan. My name is Ethan Calloway. I am 38 years old, and I work as a project manager for Crimson Harbor Group, a construction company in Portland, Oregon. Those words came from my mother, while I stood in a hospital corridor at 11:30 p.m., watching nurses wheel my wife Emily into emergency surgery for a ruptured appendix that had turned into peritonitis. Our 4-year-old twin boys, Mason and Lucas, were at home with a neighbor who had work at 6 a.m. and could not stay the night. I had called my parents because I needed help. Real help. Not money, not advice. Just someone to watch my kids while I stayed with my wife who might die from complications. The surgeon had used words like sepsis and touch and go, while my hands shook and I tried to think of who could take care of my boys until morning. My parents lived 20 minutes away in a house I had helped them buy 3 years earlier when my dad's roofing business went under. They knew Emily. They had held Mason and Lucas as babies. They had eaten Sunday dinners at our table for the past 4 years, and I had never asked them for anything like this before. We have tickets to see Fleetwood Mac with Tyler tonight, my mother continued. We have been planning this for months. Your brother drove down from Seattle specifically for this concert. I stood there holding the phone, watching doctors rush past me toward the surgical wing, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, not disappointment, just a clear, quiet understanding that when it mattered most, they would choose a concert over their grandchildren. Mom, Emily is in surgery. The twins are scared. I just need someone to stay with them until morning. Call a babysitter, my father said in the background. We are not missing this show. I hung up without saying goodbye. The neighbor, Margaret, agreed to stay until I could arrange something else. I called a babysitting service and paid $300 for an overnight sitter to watch my boys while I sat in a waiting room, wondering if my wife would make it through the night. Emily survived. The surgery took 4 hours and she spent 2 days in intensive care before they moved her to a regular room. My parents never called to check on her. They never asked about the boys. 3 days later, my mother texted me asking if we were still coming to Sunday dinner. I stared at that text for a long time before I deleted it. I'd been supporting my parents financially for 3 years. When my father's roofing company collapsed after a lawsuit from a client whose roof leaked and caused water damage, they lost their house and most of their savings. I stepped in because that is what you do for family. I gave them $2,000 every month to cover their rent and expenses. I put them on my cell phone plan. I paid for their car insurance and helped with medical bills when my mother needed dental work. They never asked for these things. I offered them because I thought that was what good sons did. My brother Tyler, who worked as a software engineer in Seattle, sent them money occasionally, but nothing regular. He had his own life, his own problems, and I never resented that. I made good money at Crimson Harbor Group, and Emily worked as a nurse practitioner so we could afford to help them. The warning signs had been there for months, small things I had ignored or explained away. When Mason broke his arm last summer, my parents said they could not come to the hospital because they had plans with friends. When Lucas had pneumonia in February, they visited once and spent most of the time complaining about the parking fees. When Emily miscarried our 3rd child in January, my mother said these things happen for a reason, and maybe we should stop trying for more kids. I told myself they were just getting older, that they dealt with stress differently than I did. My father had always been practical to the point of coldness, and my mother had never been the type to drop everything for emotional support. But Emily noticed things I missed. She mentioned that they seemed more interested in what I could do for them than in being part of our lives. They never ask about the boys unless they want something, she said one evening after my parents had called to ask if I could pay for new tires on their car. When was the last time they came over just to see us? I could not remember. Every visit, every phone call, every interaction seemed to involve some request or expectation. They needed help with their computer, their television, their bills. They wanted me to look at their car, fix their garbage disposal, or drive them to appointments when their own car was in the shop. But they were my parents. I thought that was how families worked. You help each other. You show up when it matters. You put family first, especially when children are involved. The night Emily went into surgery, I learned that I had been wrong about what family meant to them. Emily came home from the hospital on a Thursday afternoon, weak but alive. The twins had been staying with my sister-in-law while Emily recovered, and when we picked them up, Mason asked why Grandma and Grandpa had not come to see Mommy in the hospital. I sat in my truck outside my sister-in-law's house for 20 minutes after that question, staring at my hands on the steering wheel. My 4-year-old son had noticed something I had been trying to ignore. My parents had not called, texted, or visited during the worst week of our lives. They had gone to their concert, enjoyed their evening with Tyler, and carried on as if nothing had happened. That weekend, they called to invite us to Sunday dinner. My mother acted as if the previous week had not occurred. She talked about the concert, how wonderful it had been, how Tyler had gotten them backstage passes to meet the band. She mentioned that they had taken pictures and posted them on social media, showing off their night out while their daughter-in-law was fighting for her life in surgery. "We should do this more often," my father said. "Tyler said he might move back to Portland if he can find the right job. Wouldn't that be nice?" I sat at their table watching them serve food I had paid for in a house I had helped them afford, and I felt something break inside me. Not anger, not hurt, just a clear and final understanding of who they really were. They had chosen a concert over their grandchildren. They had chosen entertainment over emergency. They had chosen Tyler's visit over their own son's crisis. That night, I called my attorney. I had been sending my parents money through an automatic transfer every month, and I wanted it stopped immediately. I also wanted to remove their access to a savings account I had opened for emergencies, an account they had been using for various non-emergency purchases over the past year. "Are you sure about this?" my attorney asked. "Sometimes these family financial arrangements can get complicated if you change them suddenly." "I am sure," I said. "And I want it documented that this is my decision, made with full knowledge of the consequences." Emily was sitting beside me when I made that call. She had been through surgery, infection, and days of uncertainty, but she reached over and took my hand while I spoke to the attorney. She understood what this meant. She knew that cutting off my parents financially would create a crisis for them, just like their refusal to help had created a crisis for us. The difference was that our crisis had been about life and death. Theirs would be about money and convenience. I hung up the phone and felt lighter than I had in years. My parents discovered the missing money on the first Tuesday of the following month. My father called me at work, his voice tight with confusion and what sounded like panic. "Ethan, there is some kind of problem with the bank. Our account is showing a zero balance, and they are saying the automatic transfer was canceled. Can you call them and straighten this out?" I was reviewing blueprints for a new office complex when he called. I set down my pen and looked out the window at the construction crews working on our current project. Men with families, men who showed up for work every day whether they felt like it or not. Men who understood that responsibility meant doing what needed to be done regardless of personal convenience. "There is no problem with the bank, Dad. I canceled the transfer." Silence stretched between us for nearly a minute. I could hear my mother talking in the background, asking what the bank had said, whether there was some kind of mistake. "You canceled it? Why would you do that?" "Because family takes care of family during emergencies. You taught me that when I was young. Apparently, concerts are more important than emergencies now." My father's voice changed, becoming defensive and loud. "That is not fair, Ethan. We had those tickets for months. We could not just throw away that money. Emily was fine. You were being dramatic. Emily was in surgery for 4 hours. She had peritonitis. She could have died. But she did not die. You are making this bigger than it was. You always do this. You always make everything about you." I hung up. 30 minutes later, my mother called. "Ethan, honey, I think there has been a misunderstanding. Your father is upset, but we can work this out. We are family. Family does not hold grudges over silly things like this." "Silly things?" "Well, you know what I mean. Everything worked out fine. Emily is home. The boys are safe. And Tyler said the concert was absolutely amazing. We got to meet Lindsey Buckingham. Do you know how rare that is?" I sat in my office chair watching the construction crews through my window, and I realized that my mother genuinely did not understand what she was saying. In her mind, Emily's emergency surgery was a minor inconvenience that had been resolved, while meeting a member of Fleetwood Mac was a once-in-a-lifetime experience that justified any decision they had made. "Mom, I need to go. I have work to finish." "Wait, Ethan. What about the money? We have bills due this week. The rent is due tomorrow, and without that transfer we cannot cover it." "You will figure something out. You always do." That evening, Tyler called. His voice was different from our parents', more careful, but I could hear the same underlying assumption that I was being unreasonable. "Look, Ethan, I get that you are upset, but Mom and Dad have been looking forward to this concert for months. They bought those tickets back in February. You cannot expect them to just throw that away because Emily had some kind of medical issue." "Some kind of medical issue?" "Tyler, she had emergency surgery. She was in intensive care for 2 days. "Yeah, but she is fine now, right? I mean, you are making this sound like she almost died or something." "She could have died. The surgeon said so. I was sitting in a hospital waiting room at midnight, trying to find someone to watch my 4-year-old twins, and our parents told me I was a hassle." Tyler was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Maybe you should have planned better. Found a regular babysitter or something." I hung up on him, too. The next morning I received a text from my mother. "Tyler is going to help with the rent this month, but this cannot continue. We need to talk." I stared at that message while I drank my coffee and watched Emily help the twins get ready for preschool. She was still moving slowly, still recovering from surgery, but she was alive and home and laughing at something Lucas had said about his toy trucks. My parents had missed all of this. They had chosen to miss it. I drove to work thinking about Tyler's comment about planning better. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not because he was wrong, but because he was missing the point entirely. This was not about planning or preparation. This was about what you do when someone you love is in crisis. That afternoon, I called my bank and asked for records of all the transactions my parents had made from the emergency savings account I had given them access to. What I discovered made me pull over to the side of the road and read the statements twice. In the past year, they had withdrawn money for a new television, a weekend trip to the coast, dinner at expensive restaurants, and tickets to 3 different concerts. None of these were emergencies. All of them were luxuries they had purchased with money I had saved for actual emergencies. The Fleetwood Mac tickets had cost $450 each. Tyler had driven down from Seattle and paid for a hotel room downtown so they could stay close to the venue. They had made a weekend of it, dining at expensive restaurants and shopping in boutiques near the hotel. According to the bank records, they had spent over $1,500 that weekend, most of it from the emergency account. While I was sitting in a hospital waiting room, they were taking photos with rock stars and posting them on social media. When I got home, Emily was resting on the couch while the twins played with blocks on the living room floor. I showed her the bank statements, and she read through them without saying anything for several minutes. "They have been treating you like an ATM," she said finally. This was never about helping them through a rough time. This was about having access to money they did not have to account for. I sat down beside her and looked at my sons building towers with their blocks, concentrating intensely on making each structure taller than the last. They were 4 years old, and they understood that when you are building something important, you pay attention to every piece. You do not walk away when it matters most. My parents had walked away. They had been walking away for months, maybe years, while I convinced myself that financial support was the same thing as family loyalty. "I should have seen this earlier," I said. Emily reached over and took my hand. "You trusted them because you are a good person. You assumed they cared about us the same way you care about them." That evening, I called Tyler and left a voicemail. I reviewed the bank statements from the emergency account Mom and Dad have been using. If you want to know why I am upset, ask them about the $1,500 they spent during your concert weekend. Ask them why they called it an emergency fund if they were using it for entertainment. He never called back. I spent the following week making phone calls and setting up new arrangements. First, I removed my parents from my cell phone plan and canceled their car insurance policy. Then I called the landlord of their apartment and informed him that I would no longer be responsible for their rent payments starting the following month. My attorney suggested that I send my parents a certified letter explaining the changes, both for legal protection and to make sure they understood the situation clearly. I wrote it on a Wednesday evening while Emily helped the twins with a puzzle at the kitchen table. Dear Mom and Dad, I wrote. Effective immediately, I am discontinuing all financial support. This includes monthly transfers, emergency account access, phone service, insurance payments, and any other expenses I have been covering. This decision is final and non-negotiable. If you have questions about your financial situation, I suggest you contact Tyler or make other arrangements. I signed it, had it notarized, and mailed it certified mail the next day. Emily read the letter before I sent it. It sounds harsh, she said. Good. It should sound harsh. They were harsh when they told me I was a hassle while you were in surgery. My parents received the letter on Friday. By Saturday morning, my phone had 17 missed calls and 12 voicemail messages. I listened to all of them while sitting in my truck outside the hardware store. The first few messages were confused and pleading. My mother kept saying there had to be some kind of misunderstanding, that families did not treat each other this way over one little disagreement. My father was more direct, demanding that I call them back immediately and stop acting like a child. By the 10th message, they were angry. My mother called me selfish and ungrateful, listing all the things they had done for me when I was young. My father said I was trying to control them with money, that I was no better than a loan shark. The last few messages were desperate. They had talked to Tyler, who had agreed to help temporarily, but he could not cover all of their expenses long term. They needed the monthly support to continue. They were willing to discuss the situation and work out a compromise. I deleted all the messages without returning any of the calls. Sunday came and went without the usual dinner invitation. Monday morning, I received a text from Tyler. Mom and Dad are really struggling. This is affecting the whole family. Can we talk? I responded. They struggled to find babysitters for their grandchildren during a medical emergency. Now they can struggle to pay their own bills. Tyler called me that afternoon. Look, I get that you are mad, but you cannot just cut them off completely. They are our parents. They are getting older and they need help. They needed help finding their priorities. I helped them with that. Ethan, be reasonable. I cannot support them by myself. I have my own expenses. Then they will need to figure out another solution. Maybe get jobs, maybe downsize their living situation, maybe stop going to concerts they cannot afford. You are being cruel. I am being practical. They taught me that family comes first. I am just applying that lesson differently than they expected. That night, Emily and I put the twins to bed and sat on our back porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunset. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without worrying about someone else's financial crisis. Any regrets? Emily asked. Not one. 3 weeks after I sent the certified letter, someone knocked on our front door at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was helping Mason with a coloring book while Emily gave Lucas a bath upstairs. When I opened the door, my parents stood on the porch looking smaller and shakier than I had ever seen them. My mother was holding a grocery bag filled with what looked like papers and photographs. My father kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other, not making eye contact. They looked like people who had been expecting this conversation for weeks and dreading every moment of it. We had no idea you would be so sensitive about this, my father said before I could speak. We thought you understood that we had made plans. My mother stepped forward, holding out the grocery bag. We brought pictures from the concert, and Tyler wrote you a letter explaining everything. We are family, Ethan. You do not just turn your back on family over one disagreement. I looked at them standing on my porch, trying to negotiate their way back into my financial support with concert photos and a letter from my brother. They still did not understand what they had done wrong. They thought this was about hurt feelings and poor communication, not about abandonment during a crisis. We know you were upset, my mother continued. But Emily is fine now. The boys are fine. Everything worked out. There is no reason to keep punishing us for something that was not even a real emergency. I stood in my doorway, listening to my mother explain why my wife's emergency surgery was not a real emergency, and I felt the last piece of doubt disappear from my mind. They had not come to apologize. They had not come to acknowledge what they had done. They had come to convince me that I was wrong for expecting them to act like grandparents when their grandchildren needed them most. Exactly, I said. They looked confused, waiting for me to continue, to explain what I meant or invite them inside to discuss the situation. Instead, I closed the door. Through the window, I watched them stand on my porch for several minutes, probably trying to decide whether to knock again or leave. Eventually, they walked back to their car, my mother still holding the grocery bag full of concert photos. Emily came downstairs with Lucas wrapped in a towel, his hair still damp from his bath. Who was at the door? My parents. They wanted to show me pictures from the Fleetwood Mac concert. She stared at me for a moment, then shook her head. Even now, they do not get it. That night, after the twins were asleep, Emily and I sat in our living room and talked about what came next. Tyler had been calling less frequently, probably realizing that his efforts to mediate were not working. My parents had apparently found part-time jobs and moved to a smaller apartment, according to information Tyler had shared in his last voicemail. Do you think they will keep trying? Emily asked. Maybe, but it does not matter. They showed me who they are when it counted most. People do not change their core priorities at their age. 6 months later, Emily was fully recovered and back to working full-time. The twins started kindergarten. I got promoted to senior project manager at Crimson Harbor Group. We bought a larger house with a better school district and a bigger backyard for the boys to play in. My parents never met our new neighbors. They never saw the boys' new school or helped them with homework or attended their soccer games. They had chosen their priorities, and I had chosen mine. Sometimes Emily asked if I missed them. I told her the truth. I missed the parents I thought I had. But I did not miss the people who called me a hassle during the worst night of our lives. The twins stopped asking about Grandma and Grandpa after a few months. Children adapt quickly when adults make their boundaries clear. I learned that family is not about blood or obligation. It is about showing up when it matters, even when it is inconvenient, even when you have other plans, even when you would rather be somewhere else. Some lessons cost more than others. This one cost me $2,000 a month and 2 parents, but it taught me exactly what my family was worth.